So, welcome to all ASI members, GLAF-free members, and interested stakeholders to our 45 Minutes on webinar. I'm Fiona, the CEO here at ASI, and it's a real pleasure to have Guido Alftenkamp, who's the Secretary General of the Global Aluminium Foil Rollers Initiative, or GLAF-free, here with us today. So, a big welcome to you, Guido.
Thank you very
And
much, Fiona.
And to set the scene, did you know that around half of global production of rolled aluminium is under ASI performance standard certification? So flat rolled aluminium products supply a wide range of sectors, including automotive, building and construction, packaging, and more. So Guido is going to be focusing on aluminium foil, as per his title there, looking particularly at packaging and battery applications. He's going to be answering some interesting questions from his perspective, including what do we mean by sustainability? Are we talking about low carbon, recycled content, ASI certification? And also, what are some of the new sustainability linked regulations for aluminium foil packaging, both in the EU and beyond? So we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So please do enter these in the Q&A box as we go along. And we also had a good number of questions submitted in advance. So thanks for those too. We'll try and address those both during and after the presentation. So with that, we're looking forward to a thought-provoking presentation. So over to you, Guido.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Again, hello to everybody, wherever you are in the global time zones. Yeah, we are now right at the countdown finish. And let me introduce you first to GLAF-free, the Global Aluminium Foil Roller Initiative that was founded 10 years ago, actually also in an online meeting. We represent about 50% of the global aluminium foil markets, and our main aim is to support the foil market on a global level with market analysis, communication, innovation topics, sustainability, recycling. And what we aim is also sharing best practice, particularly on sustainability and promotion. So that is basically the organization PR. Let's get down to some foil data and facts. Yeah, almost 10% of the global primary production is actually used to produce aluminium foil. And the global foil demand is above 7 million tons. That is in the range of beverage can sheet, for example. Main applications for foil are technical applications. For example, all the heat exchangers for air conditioning, but also in transportation, use aluminium foil. Then the new big thing coming, battery foil, but also insulation, and you name it. So it's very diverse also in the technical application field. And in packaging, it is aluminium foil, semi-rigid containers, household foil, flexible packaging, a bit more rigid packaging, the semi-rigid packaging. Flexible packaging, by the way, can be aluminium foil dominant. Just think about all the confectionery wraps, cheese foils, yogurt lids, etc. So that would be considered as aluminium foil dominant. While then there is also a big share of aluminium foil used as a minor component, either together with plastic or paper. And the main aim of aluminium foil and that flexible packaging is usually providing the absolute barrier at the thinnest possible gauge. Coming from an aluminium foil world, we have to consider also the language we are talking about. Yeah, so the aluminium world obviously talks about aluminium as a raw material, and often it is meant primary. Yeah, that is usually the ingot form. It's the element raw material. When people using aluminium foil talk about aluminium, they actually mean aluminium foil. And that is all aluminium rolled below 2.2 millimeters or 200 microns. And that is usually delivered in coil form, as you can see it here as an example. That has a significant consequence, particularly when you talk about things like carbon footprint. So let's take that 4+ tons of CO2 equivalents are relevant for the primary production, and then you always have to add another ton for the full production. So then obviously it makes a huge difference whether you talk about 4 or 5 tons. So please keep that in mind. I'll try to be always specific when I mean here primary aluminium or secondary aluminium or aluminium foil. So what is green or sustainable aluminium? That is often a question we are asked, what is green, or how can we define green or sustainable aluminium? And meanwhile, we differentiate into 3 categories, so to say. So the most obvious one is the low carbon aluminium. So that has a very direct environmental impact, usually even meant with low carbon primary aluminium. Then there is another version. You can have a high recycled content, which for all aluminum experts, it's clear. Then you have the direct environmental impact. And we will talk about that, how good this is as an indicator for green or sustainable aluminium. And the last and bit different one is the certified one. And in the aluminium world, there is only the ASI certification available. That is a more a holistic certification for responsibility in the value chain, so including also social impacts, not just environmental ones. And here is also important that there is a pathway to reduce the impact, so not the absolute impact is the absolute final figure for this certification. So. And whatever you talk about or what you understand, obviously green and sustainable aluminium has different meaning and can be understood different ways when 2 people talk to each other. Let's start with the environmental benefits of the recycled content. So generally, that maximizing the recycling of all aluminium products after use, end of life, leads to an increased average aluminium recycled content in new aluminium products. That is not just for foil, that is globally. Whenever you recycle aluminium, the natural flow of the material, because of its value, is to reuse it, to recycle it, and therefore it is kind of replacing primary aluminium, virgin aluminium, somewhere. So that is kind of the global thing. The problem starts when some users call for high aluminum recycled content in specific applications, in particular if that is at the detriment of others, because that does not necessarily result in a more circular economy. Particular when you have to redirect natural flows of the material so that only one or few applications get a high recycled content, that is usually paired with additional efforts, at least in logistics. So that's what we mean, that it's not necessarily resulting in a more circular economy. However, there are some few cases where a specific aluminium application is homogeneously collected, mainly alloy alike. So it makes very much sense to have a closed loop recycling. And the best example here is a beverage can. That is a very homogeneous product, even globally, occurring in high volumes, so relatively easy to collect and to process directly into new cans. And I think that is, you don't need any legislation for it. It is just a natural flow. So that's good. In the EU, to assess the environmental impact of aluminium products, the product environmental footprint circular formula allocates also only a very limited benefit of recycled content as compared to the end-of-life recycling rate. So just 20% is allocated via the recycled content, but 80% is with the recycling rate. And the recycled content even comes a bit more from a steel perspective for the metals. Yeah. So the lower the product environmental footprint it must be, you have to mainly work on the end of life recycling rate. Yeah. So which is a benefit of all aluminium products. Talking about the recycled content, please bear with me, but I have to restate it. No recycled content without prior recyclability and recycling, because that is necessary. The definition is usually the proportion of recycled material in a given product. And the ISO norm even includes, or definition includes, only pre-consumer and post-consumer recycled content. While the pre-consumer, we see that often is very open to interpretation, also depending on the material. For aluminium, for the aluminium world, we consider the process scraps generated during any rolling or slitting operations do not fall within the scope. Yeah, so that is very clear. All this scrap should not be considered even under the ISO definition as a recycled content. Looking at the latest European packaging legislation, packaging waste regulation, they have included a mandatory plastic content for the plastics, but also provide the voluntary labeling for other materials, but that is only for post-consumer recyclates. So that is very clear. In the future, when anybody wants to put something on the European market, talking about as an end product of packaging, then it's only post-consumer recyclate, which is either meeting the legal obligation in the form of plastics or in the voluntary labeling for other materials like aluminium. So that's very clear. Post-consumer is also very clearly defined. It is the final consumption phase of the material. I'm just saying this because there were also creative people that some production scraps at the customer level would be considered as post-consumer, the first consumer, but that is not the one, it is the last consumer. And what is very important along the value chain is please take care of whatever you claim around recycled content. It is very important that you keep a very open and transparent communication, because only then people can follow what you give into the value chain, and there is no misinterpretation possibility. We have certain recycling challenges for aluminium foil packaging applications, and I will take you through this chart because then it's relatively easy to understand. So looking at the foil container, semi-rigid, almost pure aluminium, relatively easy to collect. The sorting is also relatively easy. Only second eddy current separators are needed for small formats. There's almost no pre-treatment necessary, so recycling gets at least a light green, so that is easy. Also, containers, small containers, but for the application of coffee capsules, then we already struggle with collection, because coffee capsules, at least under the current European definition, is not defined as packaging, so it's not widely collected everywhere. And then, obviously, if you're not collected, you cannot sort and don't need pre-treatment and cannot go into recycling. So that's why this route is a more yellow one. The coffee capsule will become packaging from the 12th of August 2026. So then the access to collection schemes are a lot easier. The aluminum foil dominant flexible packaging, they are also widely collected, so that's giving a green. The problem is that most of those formats, confectionery foils, cheese foils, etc., they are small and become even smaller once you crunch them a little bit. So therefore, in the sorting centers, you definitely need at least one additional eddy current separator. Only then you can go to the pre-treatment if it's then separated in the sorting center and can go to recycling. Then we have the other example of aluminium in flexibles, so together with paper or plastic or even both. The collection is not a real issue, at least in Europe, for the packaging collection. But then it starts, the sorting is a bit tricky. It is either sorted with the aluminium fraction or sometimes refused from plastic or paper streams and then going to the rejects. But, usually it's sorted with the aluminium fraction. Then the pre-treatment is possible in a pyrolysis version or facility, but then only the aluminium is targeted, so the aluminium foil, and that is usually the minor components. So all the other materials are basically lost or used in the form of energy. Therefore, also only the aluminium can be recycled or is recycled. In contrary to flexible packaging with minor aluminium share, the beverage carton containing aluminium foil, so for milk or juices, etc., they are widely collected. They are also sorted because the beverage carton is an own sorting fraction in modern packaging sorting centers. And therefore, with a bit of a deep pre-treatment, which is a deep pulping, then the so-called polyal can be separated and the aluminium also goes into a material recycling. So I'm just showing with this chart, it may be a bit more complicated than you expected or less complicated, however, at least the aluminium foil is always very diverse in its applications and therefore also how to be treated in the end of life. Now let's go to the recycled content in aluminium foil. The alloys for aluminium foil are quite specific, usually very high aluminium content with certain alloying elements be limited for particularly for the use of in contact with food. And to make it very clear, post-consumer recyclates can hardly be found in these kinds of alloys. And the main reason is that there is no separate collection of such applications to avoid the decreasing of aluminium content or introducing of undesired elements by mixing several alloys. So we in the Secretariat and then many other colleagues we know, we are not aware for any really separate collection scheme of aluminium foil applications to really provide a post-consumer recyclate content. So therefore, whenever we read about recycled content in aluminium foil, it is most likely originating from pre-consumer or post-industrial scraps or coming from other sources which are not aluminium foil. And here again, we, like basically the entire industry, really recommend to communicate transparently the shares of pre- and post-consumer recycled contents, because then this can also be calculated in a serious environmental footprint calculation. As said before, the concept of pre-consumer scrap is very open to certain interpretations and also controversial. Talking about resource efficiency, that is my favorite chart, asking a politician What is the better packaging in terms of resource efficiency or environmental benefits? A rigid pack with an 80% recycling rate or a flexible pack containing an aluminium foil with 0% recycling rate. And in probably 95 to 99% of the cases, I get the answer, of course, the packaging with a high recycling rate is better. Yeah? 80% recycling rate just sounds better than zero. However, when you then recalculate what is material loss, 80% recycling rate of a 70-gram can means there's 14 grams lost. While with a flexible pack weighing only 10 grams, the total material loss is just 10 grams. It's the entire pack. Yeah? But 10 is less than 14. So that is usually when people start thinking. And I was asking not what recycling rate is better, I was asked which packaging is more resource efficient. And here we go to this topic of resource efficiency versus recycling. And usually the overall goal is to lower the total environmental impact of consumption and production. So basically, we want to have a better efficiency on the use of resources. Yeah? And recycling can support this goal, but should not be the target in itself. Otherwise, we are increasing material thicknesses because that is way better to recycle, but less resource efficient. Yeah? And I give you a very clear and scientific answer, an example to this, what that means in practice. Colleagues did peer-reviewed LCA for packaging of pasta sauce. And typical packaging is a steel can, the glass jar, or the pouch containing aluminium foil. And all here, the bars you see include primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging, but here we focus on the primary packaging, so pouch, glass jar, and steel can. The light green means the CO2 emissions with current recycling rates. Yeah? So that means that for glass jars, for glass and steel, the recycling rates currently in Europe are above 80%. So that is already included in the carbon footprint of packaging for pasta sauce. Yeah? So what you can see firstly, that the pouch using less material is, even with a 0% recycling rate, way below the glass and the steel can from a performance point of view, because it is very simple, less material is used. Yeah. So then we added the theoretical example to be in the optimum to what are the CO2 emissions at 100% recycling rate. That is the dark green one. So first of all, the good message is in all three cases, more recycling lowers the environmental footprint. The relatively low decrease of CO2 emissions for the dark green bar is just related because the steel already comes from a very high recycling rate. So the impact is just less because it's already included. Same with glass. The highest impact is obviously with the pouch because that goes from 0 to 100. But overall, the resource efficiency impact is basically 60 to 70% by using less materials, being more resource efficient. Yeah, so that's the message here. The less we use, and foil is at the thinnest gauges here in this kind of packaging, just 6 to 9 micron, so very thin. and that provides a full functionality throughout the entire life cycle. Coming to the new European Packaging Waste Regulation, PPWR, there's a very famous among the food and packaging world right now. So first proposal was published in November 2022. A lot of intensive discussions and negotiations took place. It finally entered into force earlier this year, and it will then enter into application on the 12th of August 2026. Unless specific measures have different later dates. So this is kind of just the framework from the timeline. The requirements of this PPWR, we expect, are very likely to have an influence on the global packaging markets even, including aluminium foil packaging, and that comes because big brand owners will often not have different packaging types for the different regions. Yeah? So if they change the packaging for a product in Europe, that is most likely rolled out sooner or later to the entire world. Yeah? Just to make it a bit more easy for them. So what were the motives for this revision, at least in the public perception? We use too much packaging, too many resources are used. And I think this could also be an argument for the global situation. Low recycling in practice. So the politicians and the public considered there is not enough recycling happening, particularly because of low collection, and even more packaging waste was littered. So that's kind of the perception. And overall, for packaging, there was a very low, or is still a very low use of recycled materials, particular plastics, yeah, but the other materials are also being challenged in a big way. The main measures of the PPWR, which are relevant for aluminium foil packaging, I would say they are mainly the recyclability requirements, but also certain packaging minimization. These are the biggest ones. Everything else is probably more relevant to others. Yeah? So what are the mandatory recyclability requirements? Packaging must be designed to be recyclable. Otherwise, it cannot be placed on the market. And that means the packaging of a packaged product. So the entire product cannot be put on the European market. Yeah? So the European Commission is now developing so-called design for recycling criteria, which will be published at the latest early 2028, so that they can enter into force in 2030. What does it mean? They developed grades, recycling performance grades of A, B, C, or technically non-recyclable. That means basically whatever these design for recycling assessments or guidelines will say in calculation, what is lower than 70% recyclable cannot be put on the European market. And then from 38 onwards, the threshold will even be 80%. So I underlined the word weighting here, which is different from by weight. Weighting gives a bit more flexibility to potentially, for example, exclude inks, adhesives, varnishes from the calculation, from the weight calculation. So then thin materials, particularly like aluminium foil, are not discriminated just by having a bit of ink on it. Yeah, because the ratio, the share of inks and lacquers are obviously much higher the thinner you go with the main substrate. Yeah. And then we also have the recycled at scale issue. That actually means then by 35, everything also has to be really recycled, not just designed to be recycled. Yeah. That is then the 55% recycling rate on EU level, and then this has to be reached by each packaging category across the EU. So what consequences do these recyclability and other measures of the PPWR have for foil? So it is relatively consent that there will be less plastic and paper laminates containing aluminium on the market, because those will be likely not considered as recyclable. So targeting the aluminium is not enough to reach then the 70 or 80% threshold for the recyclability performance grade. However, there might be that there are some more aluminum dominant solutions increase. Just think from a wet pet food pouch, maybe more an aluminum foil tray, from a classic paper alu wrap for chocolate bars, it may become an alu wrap that is already on the market but can go there. But also plastic coffee capsules are becoming more and more aluminum versions, also because of their recyclability. And you can name also other other examples here. So what are the overall conclusions? Aluminium foil is a very resource-efficient solution for packaging and technical applications, mainly due to its thin gauge with all aluminium properties such as barrier or heat conductivity. Foil has very specific challenges, contrary to the other aluminium areas, which differentiates it from other applications, such as lightweight, because it's very lightweight in its collection schemes, therefore for recycling and recycled content. And traditional and new applications of aluminium foil, such as battery foil, are enablers for a transition to have a less impact world in the future. So finally, I would also like to make a little bit of advertising at the end. These and many other issues will be discussed at the 8th Global Aluminium Foil Roller Conference in New Delhi, end of January next year. You can here see the program. And now I thank you very much for your kind attention, and it is the time for questions, I would say.
Yes, very much. Thank you, Guido. That was excellent. Looking at the questions that have come in, and there's a few more coming in now, I think they're probably in three groups. So there are some that are looking at the question of foil to foil loops, some about recycled content, and some about post-consumer scrap, sometimes in the context of recycled content as well. Maybe if we start with foil to foil, you covered how aluminium foil in different kinds of packaging applications is collected, and what the barriers are at different steps towards the actual recycling. Are there any examples of a foil to foil loop in place? Do you think it really is a green solution? And we had a question right at the start as, does it make sense, for example, for cheese foil to kind of consider that sort of approach? Particularly, I think the question is asking around, cutting that might be done in-house. So again, it's at that pre-consumer stage. Foil to foil. Further comments?
For post-consumer foil to foil loop, it is relatively difficult, and that is not because it's technically difficult. That is relatively easy. However, everybody now considering the weight of a cheese foil, of a confectionery foil, and now imagine you need 10, 50 tons for decent remelting operations. That is a lot of cheese and a lot of chocolate involved. And then the collection is the tricky thing, and basically the barrier to this approach, because it's not feasible to just collect a confectionery foil or cheese foil together. That's just not enough volume generated at one place. And that is the big difference to the aluminum beverage can, where the base weight is higher and it occurs in a higher volume at a certain place for collection.
Great. Okay, so if we turn now to recycled content, irrespective of whether it's in a closed loop or likely not, as you've just described, maybe we start off the top with a question, anonymous question, but I was going to type the answer into this, but I clicked the wrong button. But it's kind of saying, well, within ISO, 1421, pre-consumer scrap, is defined in a certain way. How can this be excluded from defining recycled content? But I think your point was that it's going to be excluded under the EU regulation, no?
Yeah. Yeah, so the difference between the ISO definition is that there is pre-consumer and post-consumer scrap, while the EU regulation for packaging is now only accepting post-consumer scrap. Yeah. Also, the motivation is probably different. The EU regulation for packaging wants to stimulate the reuse of materials, while the reuse of there's after use, while the reuse of industrial scraps, so pre-consumer scraps, that is also beneficial for any ESG accounting, etc. Yeah, so the purpose is a bit different, and we are very much promoting, and I just can underline it here again. Be transparent in the communication along the value chain, differentiate between pre and post consumer so that people do not have a chance to misinterpret.
And fall afoul of these regulations. And I guess
Yeah,
within our chain of custody standard, we make a clear differentiation of those two types as well. One of the
exactly.
questions that came in before the session was, is there a maximum recycled content that you can use for different types of aluminium? And let's talk about foil here.
I would say no.
Mhm.
If you have a homogeneous collection that, for whatever reason, works, this can be exclusively used for new applications, even up to 100%.
Mhm. But that alloy quality needs to be there
Yeah.
because of the requirements of the rolling
Yeah.
process,
That's
particularly
that's
for
why I
light
said
gauge.
you always
Yeah.
consider the homogeneous collection, homogeneous meaning alloy alike, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if companies are thinking about how they meet those European packaging regulation guidelines, how would they go about increasing that recycling percentage in foil for flexible packaging, for example?
Well, so first of all, it is not necessary for aluminium. It is just only mandatory for plastic in packaging.
Mm,
However, there is a category of packaging types, or soon to become packaging type, that is a coffee capsule. Some brands are already advertising with a high recycled content, also mainly coming from post-consumer scrap, but that is often coming from a different application, mostly from the beverage can chain, let me call it like this, or cycle.
mm. And are there technology solutions that are going to help either in production or in the kind of sorting, separation, recycling, or is it really more about kind of just the nature of the product and the volumes that are available in different places?
It is mainly the volumes generated, even if, first of all, the sorting technology is advancing with an incredible speed and is really going forward. Nevertheless, aluminium is usually has the lowest share in the packaging sorting center. Yeah, and adding a lot of equipment for the smallest share of materials is then commercially not viable, and that's why it is usually not then separated afterwards.
Mhm.
Yeah? So it's just the aluminium fraction.
Yes. Couple of small technical questions. One is, will it be considered recycled aluminium when post-consumer waste is transferred to an electrolysis process again to refine it for purification, as I've said here, or is recycling defined to keep aluminium in metal form? Um, I think that there are processes in which alloy purification happenings. Often, I think it involves putting more primary in to kind of increase, to sweeten the melt, as
That's
I've heard people describe, but it would still be recycled if there's a post-consumer
yes.
origin. Yeah.
First of all, it is recycling. The kind of adding virgin is more kind of a stretching it, but or diluting it. However, there are processes in place where there is a generation of hydrogen and heat to produce alumina, and that is really a purification, which, if there is excess of energy, etc., can make sense. But probably the direct way of finding an end consumer or kind of an end application for this scrap is probably the preferred way.
Mm. Bearing in mind your point that recycling is not the end goal, resource efficiency is the end goal, including energy inputs that may otherwise be unnecessary.
Exactly.
There's a question about what are common aluminium grades for, I think this might be for PCR aluminium foil. Like, are there any 1000 series in the market, or?
That I think there are thousands and 3,000 alloys for high PCR content for you to be used for foil in the market. Yeah.
All right. If we turn now to some questions around post-consumer scrap, are there things that can be done at a sectoral level, particularly for foil, that would increase the quality and availability of post-consumer scrap? I mean, that kind of comes to kind of collection and municipal systems and things, but also perhaps back to your slide, which showed the different levels of maturity and feasibility for different types of packaging.
So first of all, we all should use more aluminium foil applications in packaging, so that increases the availability, of course. Now, when you go back, when you look then afterwards to the chart for the small aluminium items, really the second eddy current working on the rejects, where those small aluminum packaging items are separated. That is really a game changer, and we see great differences in sorting performance if there is one or two eddy currents installed in such sorting centers.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question a bit related to this. Should aluminium cans be crushed before we put them in the recycling bin? I know we're talking about foil, so similarly, we're all kind of consumers in our own right as well. I've heard, you should ball it up, and that makes it easier for the
Yes.
separation to happen. Practically, what should we all be doing? Is this a myth? Is this real?
Make kind of a flat ball, not a too round of a ball, because the rounder the ball, the more difficult on the transport belt it is to move forward. If you have a ball on a steep belt, then it stays always at the same position. So just crush it, make it a bit flat, and then it's easy to go. And don't wrap any food contents. So these famous chicken wings, bones, etc. Just wrap them for convenience in foil and then put it into recycling. No, please separate it, but you don't have to clean the foil. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then if we look then from away from kind of monomaterial to composite materials, how is that the challenges that you identified there, how are they being addressed? Is there investment, municipal systems, looking at this, does it vary globally?
Yeah, so the issue is the sorting, and as that cannot be figured out by traditional sorting technologies, and most likely new ones will not be introduced. Unfortunately, the answer of packaging designers is to go to monomaterial solutions. That can be, or in many cases, it will be plastic packaging, so substituting aluminium foil by polymers. But there are also, as I said at the end, there are also possibilities or options to go to more aluminium based monomaterial structure.
Great. So we are close to our 45 minutes. I mean, we have a lot of questions. I don't know if you want to hang on or if people want to as well, but maybe we'll undertake to address some of these questions, quite a few of which I think are asking about a little bit more data or what studies are available. So we might work with you, Guido, to compile some of those in a follow-up article and to address some of these questions, which are probably a bit specific and hard to answer in the time that we have available for us. So maybe to wrap up, I think you had some key messages about resource efficiency and recycling at that whole of sector level within that resource efficiency goal as being the most important thing to keep in mind. Recycled content at a product level is going to be voluntary for non-plastic materials, I think was one of your key messages under that packaging regulation. But are you still expecting that to see some growing interest for aluminium? And if so, what would be your key messages to downstream aluminium users and those who commission and design packaging on this?
First of all, don't fall for the short-term marketing approaches. Be and stay consistent with the messages and aim for a lower environmental impact in total. And of course, it's not necessary to increase any aluminium content just to make it a bit more recyclable, because that's not the goal and counterproductive. Use aluminium foil as any other material as wisely as possible, and always consider the greater good for it. Yeah. So I think that's
Key.
the overall message.
Exactly. Yes, as we all work to kind of reduce our impacts, I think keeping that eye on the big picture is really, really critical. So as I said, sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. We will try and do a wrap-up article, work with Guido on that to try and address those, particularly where you're asking for a little bit more data. And I think Glaffrey has some interesting studies and so on that they can share some links to that will provide a bit more of a deep dive. So I want to thank you very much, Guido, for sharing your insights and all of the work that you're doing in this space that helps all of our thinking about how to promote a more sustainable aluminium value chain. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Sorry again that we didn't get to all those questions, but it's a testament, I think, to the interest in these issues and the practicalities and details about how we make our ambitions happen. We will have more 45-minute on sessions coming up, including a standards revision webinar on November 12th, so keep an eye out for that. And on that, I wish everybody a good day or evening ahead. Thank you very much. And thanks again, Guido.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and to the audience. Thank you.